On today's Locked On Jayhawks, it's border war time. We preview Kansas, Missouri.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio and on Blue Sky at Derek Johnson. And this is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching all of our shows wherever you get them, because you can find it wherever you get your podcasts or on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition, we're going to be previewing Kansas and Missouri. Jayhawks looking to bounce back, looking to show they can win on the road, and it's going to be a hostile environment as a rivalry matchup in the border war continues on in Columbia, Missouri. We're going to get into our headlines of the game, Missouri scouting report, matchups, and players to watch. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Kansas takes on Missouri. This is a Sunday game at noon. So, good thing the Chiefs play on Sunday Night Football. You don't have to double down if you're a fan of both. This is going to be an interesting one for KU for a lot of reasons. I mean, one, you were looking to bounce back. You lost for the first time this season. How are you going to respond to that? You also didn't look good in doing it. So, again, going back to the idea, how are you going to respond? You also view it, and it seems like there have been some more stuff that has come out afterwards about that from the Creighton loss. Obviously Rylan Griffin didn't play in the game. Sounds like he had flu. It sounds like a lot of the players were maybe just overcoming flu, or maybe had some stuff too. Does that linger over into this matchup too? Or is that something where that can kind of explain, that specific, what happened in the game a little bit more of why things at times looked a little bit lethargic? That is entirely possible there. And so it's also an opportunity to show you can win on the road this season. Like, obviously, to have a successful season, you're eventually going to have to win on the road. Typically, I don't know what the formula is this year because it's a 20-game league schedule, but typically in the past years when, it was a league schedule of 18 games, it was, can you go undefeated at home? Can you go 5-4 on the road? Can you go 4-5 on the road, right? And so can you be around 500 on the road, take care of business at home, and then, make more happen on neutral courts? Well, you got to be able to win on the road. This is going to be a tough environment, just as it was at Creighton. But this one's going to be different because there's going to be that level of vitriol. There's going to be that level of hate in the stands from Missouri. This is the border war, the border showdown, whatever you want to call it. I know they've kind of gone away from that name. I don't care. We all know it that way. KU leads the series 176-95. Kansas has now won 4 in a row since they renewed it after the 2012 meetings. Kansas has gone undefeated so far. They've gone 3-0, winning 2 at home, winning 1 in Columbia. But this will be the final home away until the neutral site games, which are scheduled to be at the T-Mobile Center the next couple of seasons. But yeah, I mean, you look at it overall now during the, I guess what you could call the Hunter Dickinson era here at Kansas. So last year and this year, Kansas is now 3-8 on the road. So can you handle that in this one? You look at the Missouri scouting report, they come in at 7-1 on the season. They are ranked right around 60 on Ken Palm and Bart Torvik so far this season. So, they've been a solid team, but haven't necessarily been, one that you would view to be like a lock to make the NCAA tournament. Top 40 offense, defense closer to the 100 range. So they've been a little bit better on the offensive end of the court. They are riding a 7-game winning streak. They lost their opener to Memphis, and that Memphis team has turned out to be a pretty good team, ended up making the Maui Invitational Finals. They beat UConn in the process. And most recently, Missouri had to beat another, I almost said Pac-12, but that's dead, an ACC school, ACC legendary team, Cal, 98-93. Cal isn't a great power conference team right now. They're not inside the top 100, but they're just outside of it. So that's a decent win there. The rest of those wins though, so their other 6 wins are all against teams who are not top 250 on Ken Palm. So it's honestly tough to tell exactly just how good this Missouri team is, right? Are they actually going to be an NCAA tournament team, or is this going to be a team that just isn't very good and they're just beating up on bad opponents? I don't know. You look at the personnel, and that's part of the problem too when we're discussing the scouting report. They've played a lot of bad teams, so the numbers are going to look inflated. And you also look at it, and it's led to making it more challenging to figure out exactly what the rotation is or what the personnel is, because their minute per game leader right now is Mark Mitchell. You might recognize that name. He was the former 5-star recruit from Bishop Miege, ended up going to Duke, having a couple years there. So far, he's averaging over 12 points, almost 5 rebounds per game, 52% from the floor. He's been the team's top defender, according to Evan Miyakawa, playing the 4 and the 5. He's a good player, versatile player and everything. He's leading them in minutes per game at 23 minutes per game. Now, Kansas has been doing a good job of getting their minutes down. Right now, they don't have a single player at 29 or more minutes per game, which would be the first time they've done that since that 2010-2011 team when Tyrell Reed led them at 28.7 minutes per game. You heard that stat if you give me a follow on Blue Sky. But that is insane that their leader in minutes per game is averaging 23 minutes per game. But the reason why they've been blowing out a lot of these opponents, they have 11 players averaging double-digit minutes per game. They've been able to go deep in the bench. So you don't totally know all the players in rotation to fully expect, right? Like Mark Mitchell's averaging 23 a game. Wouldn't surprise me if he plays 30 minutes in this game, right? Arguably their best player, though, could be their point guard, 6'3", Anthony Robinson. He's averaging 12 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists per game, basically, 57% from the floor. He hasn't been a big three-point shooter. He's not taking high volume, hasn't shot it at an insane clip or anything like that. But he is coming off a really good game in that win over Cal. 29 points, 6 assists in what is, at this point, their best win. And you look at Evan Miyakawa's website, offensive BPR, he's the best player on the team. Defensive BPR, he's top 2 on the team. So he's been overall, you could argue, their best player so far. Now, KU is obviously very familiar with their 6'3" sharpshooter, Caleb Grill. He was on Missouri last year. He's been on Iowa State before. I mean, KU's played him in many different facets. He's a really good shooter. He is 21 of 38 from 3 so far this year, 55%, averaging 13.6 points per game. So you got to guard him from 3. Tamar Bates, another guy they're familiar with. He was in the Kansas City area at, I believe, Piper, and then ended up going off to, I forget if it was like IMG Academy or where, and then ended up going to like Texas, Indiana. KU played him, I believe, when he was at Indiana. I think committed to Texas when I don't even remember. Now he's at Missouri. He was at Missouri last year when they went to Allen Fieldhouse. He's averaging 12.3 points per game, 35% from 3. He's also a good three-point shooter. Those are the two you really got to watch out. I mean, that's a combined 33 of 72 from a three-point range between the two of them. That's, in the mid-40s for percentage-wise. They'll also use Marquise Warwick. He's a 6'3" guard, 9 points per game. Another good shooter, 43% from 3. And then what's interesting is Tony Perkins was a transfer they brought in from Iowa who had really good numbers from Iowa. Wasn't a great shooter, good downhill player, good size to him, can really drive and attack. He's really yet to get it going. 8 points, 2.5 assists per game, good downhill driver, but hasn't really shot it well so far. And hasn't been as high up as some of those other guys in the rotation. So don't know what to expect there. They do have 7-footers, 2 of them in Josh Gray. He's getting just 3 points per game, but handful of rebounds per game. So big dude that rebounds well. And then Peyton Marshall is 7 foot, 300 pounds. He's played limited minutes, but they can throw a 7-footer at you between those two. Some interesting wings or 4 men between 6'9", Aiden Shaw, former highly recruited player. He's off to an efficient shooting start. 6'6", Anor Boateng, 6'8" wing, Jacob Cruz. He had big numbers at UT Martin, but he's kind of struggled early for them. And then 6'10", Trent Pierce is going for 7.4 points per game on over 50%. Those are some other names that certainly can factor in. Again, it's tougher because they've been able to really crack deep into the rotation. So what they've done well as a team so far, they do play at one of the faster tempos in the country. They're also one of the tallest teams in the country, top 25 in Ken Palm's average height ranking. They're the number 1 offense right now in 2-point offense. So they're getting easy buckets. They're making easy buckets. They're also shooting 35% from 3, which is good enough with that 2-point offense. They have a top 30 offensive rebound rate in the country, and they're one of the best 5 teams so far in the country at getting to the free throw line. Then on the defensive end, they've been elite at creating steals, forcing turnovers, top 20 rates nationally in both. They've been pretty good at 2-point defense. But again, as I go through all those numbers, we go back to the schedule. Some of those are super inflated. Like, what do you think is going to be easier to put up insane stats against when you're playing against North Carolina, Michigan State, Creighton, and Duke among your first, 7 or 8 games? Or when your strength of schedule ranks 363rd on Ken Palm, which is what Missouri's strength of schedule currently ranks. So I say all those things, and they look like strengths on paper, but there's a chance that once Missouri plays teams that are their size, their athletic range, teams that are as good as them or better than them, that a lot of those numbers are going to drop off fast. So which ones are exactly their best strengths? I don't entirely know. Where they have struggled so far, they haven't been a particularly good defensive rebounding team. In their 2 games against Memphis and Cal, they did not shoot it well from 3. So can you limit the 3-point shots? And then the defensive rebound rate that we just mentioned was horrible in both of those games. So again, tough to tell certain areas because of the schedule so far and the smaller sample size. But it does appear they are a team that has some interesting firepower and can play fast, and you got to get out to them on the 3-point line. As far as the importance of this one, I mean, I say this all the time. Rivalries are what college sports was built on. I know it no longer feels that way with the nationality of things, and especially in college football with the 12-team playoff and I guess NIL, and that changes. And you know, it is a shifting climate and how things are nowadays. But the basis of college sports is those regional rivalries and matchups that you play against. So this is everything from that perspective, but it also is an opportunity to bounce back. It's an opportunity to show you can win on the road if you're Kansas. Let's get to our matchups of the game, players to watch next on Locked On Jayhawks. Our episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. I love a great deal as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of hot coals just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. It has to be, no hoops, no BS. So that's why Mint Mobile caught my attention, because you can get wireless for just $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan. To get started, go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. There you'll see that right now, all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for just $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. That is mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. Disc and $45 up front payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for more details. Thank you for making this your first listen every day with Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget, you can check out our bonus episode talking about DJ Warner transferring away, Logan Brown going pro. We had a KU Creighton recap. And then you can make your next listen after that, Locked On College Basketball, to get you further ready for what's going to come this weekend. Or Locked On College Football with Championship Weekend. Our matchups of the game here for Kansas, Missouri. Number 1, fast break defense. Missouri wants to play fast on offense, right? They score almost 15 fast break points per game. That ranks in the 91st percentile nationally. So becomes obvious that for Kansas, if you can limit them to the half court, you make them a little bit more uncomfortable, right? You make them slow down a little bit. Kansas has only given up close to 8 points in transition per game. Like, they've been above average to good at it nationally, so solid at it. But this is another beast when a team wants to play this way. And again, some of those numbers inflated by the schedule, but you have to consistently get back. You have to mark shooters. That's the big one that you didn't do a great job against Creighton. You have to do a better job in this one. Prevent some of those easy buckets. A big reason why they're number 1 in the country in 2-point percentage, besides the schedule, is that they've been able to get by defenses. And if you're getting easy layups and dunks in transition, obviously you're going to shoot a very high percentage there. But if this is a half-court game, I think that favors KU. Now, obviously, KU wants to get in transition offensively too. Kansas is averaging over 15 points per game in transition as well, so they've been really good at it. But in a world where it is half court versus half court, I think that would bother Missouri more based on the identities. Like, I think Kansas can play in either. I think it would bother Missouri more, but I guess kind of wait and see on that, because again, kind of a weird sample size with the Missouri schedule. Number 2, Kansas being strong with the ball and avoiding turnovers. They actually did a really good job of that in the game against Creighton. That was one of the things they did very well despite the loss. They've generally been good at it this season. Kansas ranks in the 96th percentile in offensive turnover rate, essentially avoiding them so far this season. But Missouri is in the 98th percentile with their 10.4 steals per game. So something's got to give here. And when you go back to matchup number 1, transition play, what's an easy way to get transition buckets or transition opportunities if you're Missouri? It's getting a steal. It's forcing a turnover, being able to play fast. So for Kansas, and you want to keep them out of transition, just continue doing a good job holding on to the ball and not having turnovers, and that'll certainly help there. We saw KU carve up the Missouri defense 2 years ago in Columbia, and Dajuan Harris, who, keep in mind, is a former Columbia native, he had a big part in that. And I think kind of fitting in his final season at KU that he gets to play back, in his hometown for this rivalry and figures to have a big hand in whether KU wins or loses this matchup. All right, number 3, Kansas figuring out the possible condensed / bracketing defense, whatever you want to call it. So in the Creighton game, Creighton played, which is interesting because, and this was pointed out, CJ Moore did a really good article in The Athletic, that like Nebraska and I think San Diego State played this like bracket defense, condensed defense against Creighton in their recent matchups, and Creighton wasn't shooting well from 3 at the time. They did shoot well from 3, obviously against Kansas, but they basically like doubled Ryan Kalkbrenner like before he could even get the ball. And the Greg McDermott saw that and said, you know what, that's what I'm going to do to Hunter Dickinson. And it basically forced Kansas to not have Hunter Dickinson take a ton of shots. And they basically helped off of KJ Adams' guy and Dajuan Harris's guy and said, we're going to live with those guys taking shots. Dajuan Harris wasn't making enough shots, and Ryland Griffin wasn't there to be somebody to help space the floor. And KU was, didn't have great shot selection and yada, yada. We don't need to dig all this stuff up. But I find it hard to believe that Missouri's not going to watch the tape and go, oh, because especially last year in the matchup last year, I think it might have been 2 years ago with Missouri, they did help off KJ Adams. I think it helped last year. So it's a similar idea to that. I'd imagine they're going to try that again in this one. So for Kansas, how do you counter that? Well, I'm sure they worked on it in practice this week. You need to start making some more threes, right? That's part of it too. Guys need to start stepping up from the perimeter too for Kansas. Can they figure that out? Because I find a hard time believing that Missouri won't throw it out in this matchup after seeing what Creighton did to success against the KU offense. All right, let's get to our players to watch, our Hawks to soar. That next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place bets on NFL action, college football action, college basketball action, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com. You can join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, finishing up here on this episode, players to watch for the Kansas-Missouri matchup for KU. So our player matchup to watch, it's Dajuan Harris versus Anthony Robinson. Robinson has arguably been Missouri's MVP so far. He was in that Cal game, those 29 points, 6 rebounds. Well, Harris is going to have his hands full defending him. Then you add to the other part of this where if this does become a transition game, okay, Dajuan Harris has as big of a role in that as anybody on the floor for KU with leading the transition offense. Then you also look to the perspective of if Missouri does any of the bracketing defense, okay, that means Dajuan needs to step up and hit some shots. And then you also have the factor of Dajuan Harris playing back at home in Columbia. He performed really well a couple years ago there in Columbia. Can he do it again in his final go-around of college basketball? And I think that'll be a really fun matchup between those two players. All right, offensive side for Hawks to soar, players we think can step up and have a big game for KU. I'm going to go to Hunter Dickinson. I guess if Missouri is playing that same bracketing defense, it's going to be tough for him to go off offensively. But I feel like he is due for a big performance, right? I feel like he is a good enough player that you expect to bounce back when there's not a great performance there. And Bill Self probably watched that tape so much and has been implementing stuff in practice to be like, hey, we have to figure out a way to get you the ball and make you active, even if another team does this again, right? And so when you look at Missouri so far this year, the thing that makes it tough, they're only allowing teams to shoot 58% at the rim, which ranks in the 77th percentile nationally. So they've been a good interior defense. And that would make you think that, okay, well, why is that going to be a good matchup for Hunter Dickinson? Here's why. Even though teams haven't shot it well, they've gotten a lot of shots at the rim. They're giving up an above average rate of shots at the rim this season, which tells me this. We go back to the schedule. They're allowing teams to take a good amount of shots at the rim, those teams just aren't converting because they've played a crappy schedule and those teams aren't good enough, long enough, athletic enough, skilled enough, whatever it is, to convert them at a high enough rate. And so I looked to last game where they played the Cal Golden Bears, a team that, again, is not a top 100 team, but has more, power level, size, athleticism, skill, whatever you want to call it. Cal shot 74% at the rim against Missouri. So I think Hunter Dickinson can have a big game. He bounces back. I'm going to say he has a big offensive performance for KU. Defensive side of the ball, this one's tough because it's hard to pinpoint with Missouri with the way that their rotation's been very condensed, I would say, into saying, okay, well, who's going to have the best matchup? This guy's playing 17 minutes per game. That guy's playing 22. Well, I like your matchup on that guy. It's I don't know. It becomes a little bit more difficult there. I'm almost tempted to say Hunter Dickinson. And I know that sounds ridiculous off a game where, struggled defensively against Creighton and a game where Missouri plays really fast and we're getting speed involved with Hunter Dickinson. That doesn't sound like a good mix. Here's why. Neither of Missouri's 2 7-footers that they play shoot threes. That's good for Hunter. And when they do play Mark Mitchell at the 5, Mark Mitchell's only taking 2 threes per game, and he's shooting them 25%. He's never been a great three-point shooter. So maybe this is a game where they do play Mark Mitchell more at the 5, and he does take 4 threes, and he goes 3 for 4. And it's one of those games where it's of course, this is classic. The guy who doesn't shoot well is shooting well against Kansas. But on paper, it might not be the worst matchup in the world. And you see Missouri scoring over 40 paint points per game. They're going to go inside. Hunter Dickinson still is huge. He is still gigantic. I don't think this is a bad matchup for him. Now, if they consistently are able to put him in ball screens, that would be problematic. But I look at their main 3-point shooters with Tamar Bates and Caleb Grill, and I think of both of those guys as more off-the-ball 3-point shooters. So I think that would be less of, when you think of Hunter Dickinson struggling in those ball screen defenses, it's in the pick and roll. It's because the ball handler is putting him in a situation. That doesn't really happen as much with off-ball shooters. So I think this is actually a decent defensive matchup for him. Also, he gets a bunch of defensive rebounds. And I know this is relating to offense, but it starts with the defense. If you're talking about Kansas getting in transition, which we saw them do extensively in their win in Columbia a couple of years ago, he's really good at outlet passes and could start some of those breaks after he gets one of those defensive rebounds. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back on Sunday afternoon to recap whatever happens in the game, and then plenty more content coming at you. If there's any breaking news, make sure to check out all of our latest episodes right here with Locked On Jayhawks.